Доброго дня всім, українські країни.
Good afternoon, everyone. UCMC continues its work, and the next topic is Megatrends in the Eastern Partnership region by 2030. Our guests are Wojciech, Przybylski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight, Serhiy Gerasymchuk, Deputy Chairman of the Board Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, Dmytro, Shulga, Director of the European Program of the International Renaissance Foundation, and Gennady, Maksak, Chairman of the Board Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. Thank you very much. We are grateful to UCMC for the opportunity to hold this event. So you voiced the name of our meeting. The topic is not new. Recently, we spoke a lot about it, and we heard a lot about it. Those who follow the events concerning Eastern Partnership, you know that in October, official consultations were completed by European Commission, European Action, and they established the next horizon and the policy that was developed for 6 countries of Eastern Europe and Southern Caucasus. And together we present our project with our Polish colleagues and together with Marshall Fund. And we would like to show that this region is really of interest. And those events that are ongoing, how we can predict what will happen, whether the policy that is proposed by EU, whether it corresponds the requests and the expectations in this region. This is the first part. And this is the first part that shows the trends, those directions that are the main for us. What may happen and what is the situation in the region now. And also we forecast for 7 or 10 years. This is a midterm or even long-term prospect, how the situation will develop during this time, what will happen. We will speak about political megatrends in this region. Now I would like to give the floor to our colleague from Poland, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight news outlet, Wojciech. Please, you're given the floor.
Thanks also for coming here to discuss something that is not yet a final product, but nevertheless we thought it's important to consult with you. And so let me start by saying that first and foremost, your feedback on the topic and on the content of this report will be most valuable, and I'll explain why. So Visegrad Insight is based in Warsaw. It's analytical and debate platform. We started off as a media, and we developed our kind of think tank profile on the way to track, map, and advocate for better quality in democracy in Central Europe. But overall, Visegrad Group has been developing policy that also relates to Eastern Partnership. So here we are with the topic of the Eastern Partnership cooperation that we've been involved in the Civil Society Forum twice before, and in that format we've been also running programs with cultural magazines from Ukraine, such as Krytyka, Ukraiński Tydzień, and several others. But now we were particularly happy to see interest, and especially, I would say, initiative from Prism to do something in a framework that we already proposed for Central Europe. 2 years ago, more or less, we started a project to develop scenarios for Central Europe. It started with the German Marshall Fund with a lot of uncertainty in the air about the directions Central Europe, the Visegrad Group countries, may go in the future. Because as the global turmoil, let's put it mildly, unravels, we see that Central Europe is already hinting on how certain trends are amplified in this particular region of European Union, of Europe overall, and the directions of the political dynamics are uncertain, and we try to map them out for the future. We created a number of policy debates in the public and in the offices of several governments, from the US government, German, French, to the European Union, European Commission, and first and foremost in the governments and in the public of Visegrad Group state, with one particular aim: to start discussing about the future, not in rosy pictures, but more concentrating on the possible scenarios, not to be surprised by the events. In a nutshell, we've seen Brexit happening, and after a decision about Brexit being made, we had lots of public and policy debate in Great Britain about the direction they want to go. In reverse, we wanted to do something else. We wanted to have a debate on policy directions before making a decisions, and be assured the decisions will be coming. So here we are in a process with Prism and with various partners from Eastern countries, Eastern Partnership countries. They want to analyze the trends, and here is our first byproduct. We will present it to you and then give the copies for free for everyone who participate. That tries to see what are global trends that are in particular pronounced in countries of Eastern Partnership. We use the framework of Eastern Partnership of the European Union, but it's not that's not the only game in town. I mean, these are countries as such, as proper, and Eastern Partnership serves as a framework. And after we have the discussion on the trends, we're developing scenarios, and by the end of February, we will come back to Kiev and to other places in Ukraine and in other countries of Eastern Partnership, but also across Visegrad Group and European Union countries, to have a serious debate about the future that might not be bright, and how do we want to react, to respond to it, to prevent the most destructive or the most negative scenarios. So in essence, this is a democratic exercise in responding to times of uncertainty. Many other such exercises are there. Perhaps I will advertise ours. We have a stamina and the methodology to develop quite plausible and quite compelling visions for political futures where there is a lot of political logic behind it. But before we do that, let me just briefly go through the main points of this report. It's now in English, but it will be soon in Ukrainian, distributed also through the channels of Prism and also on our website. It has been only presented last week, first time in Minsk, in a similar discussion also with diplomats. Interestingly enough, for Belarusian context, there was also the public officials or the government present, which is unlikely for this country, where they usually try to avoid public involvement in discussions about the future of their country. So here are five points, and we agreed to divide it so that I speak less between me and Serhiy, who is a great coordinator on behalf of this project from Prism. And I'll narrate to you just these first two, Serhiy the last three, and then we go on with the discussion also involving you. So the five trends that we focus on. One is politics and security. Second set of trends concern demography and society. Then there is the question of economy and the tech, with special focus on the component of digital services and products that are part of this economic trend. Then there is information and again digital. Well, what is not digital these days? And last but not least, energy and environment. So these are the five big areas. And as you can go on and read through the trends and read through the points that we raise and our members of the panel of experts have raised, we can start from the politics and security. first and foremost, what we see is that there is no status quo. It's almost too obvious to say that in Ukraine, but from many angles in the countries of Eastern Partnership, like Belarus, for instance, there is a prevailing narrative of status quo. Things have been, are, and will stay always the same. That is not true. I mean, you tell me how not true it is. But also in the given context of how European Union relates to the Eastern Partnership, in which place European Union is today, this status quo is not going to prevail much longer. But let us face several facts and then discuss it. First, there is a growing Russian resilience in the region. We see that despite Russia is a declining global power that is measured on various factors, it is proving itself much more resilient than expected, despite this decline, or maybe just because of this decline, in its vicinity, in the countries that compose the Eastern Partnership, and much beyond. I mean, we see also clear influence of Russia in the Western Balkans and in countries of Central Europe, as well as we can see the operations in the West. Secondly, the European Union is looking for a way how to move on beyond the first 10 years of Eastern Partnership. And the current search and current direction from the European Union is much less of a political drive. It wants to scale down on this political ambitions, and currently it wants more efficient technical cooperation in various sectors. So in a way that says European Union is losing its direction and its ambition, along with the main protagonists of this framework that are not so vocal, or those who are vocal are not so important in the framing of the European Union. So that is the new circumstance with which the countries of Eastern Partnership have to deal with, because the whole framework which provide certain instruments, financial, legal, and generally the directions for these countries is quickly, or maybe quickly changing, in relative terms quickly, of course. Then each of these countries of Eastern Partnership is developing its own individual agenda and individual perspective on how to move on, how to use Eastern Partnership framework, and how to build its own security and resilience, or prosperity also, for the future. So there are individual strategies of these countries, and we take notice that the countries are not looking for some much more regional cooperation, much more they are, like a global trend shows also, looking inwards and looking into their own individual strategies and perspective on how to build up relations with the rest of Europe. And last, there is a continuation, so that is not something we cannot ignore this trend, but there is a continuation and a rise of political activism and instability in Eastern Partnership countries. I mean, throughout the world you can see the number and the energy of public protests, public street protests, public activism coming from the civil society being more and more frequent and impactful on the politics. And in Eastern Partnership you see the same. That's all across the board, all of these countries. On the other side, you can see that naturally this insecurity or instability trends in Eastern Partnership that relate mostly to Russia, but not only, because there are other actors like China appearing on the compass, on the political compass, is introducing at least a speculation on the direction of how to build a resilient future. Not to mention the usually stable factors, or at least for the last 10 years or so, stable factors like the EU or NATO, about which there are many more questions because of questioned leadership, or the questions about commitment, or kind of structural changes to the NATO organization or European Union organization. Just to name a few, Brexit is, well, sooner than later happening finally. And we have also Turkey, which is one of the sources of today's serious crisis in the security framework of NATO, closely related also to the situation in Ukraine. Then the second area trend, I'll wrap it up quickly. One of the key elements of the trend, or one of the key trends that we observe in respect to the society demography, is that all of Eastern Partnership countries, except for Azerbaijan, are losing people. I mean, people are migrating, people are moving fastly. That's partly process of the integration with the European Union. You see this trend of people going for work elsewhere. That doesn't have to be necessarily negative trend. You can see that there are many responses to that, but that's definitely a rapid movement. There is also a pattern to it. We see that these are mostly female workers. If people are moving, this is not, I mean, yes, we are a manel, perhaps because many female experts are now speaking on different panels in other countries of the European Union, but the thing is that there is also growing activism and activation of the women potential in public, also in the workforce, but also in speaking out and projecting gender-specific agenda in certain areas. So we observe that, along with growing inequalities, because as the overall situation in several countries is improving, overall we see growing inequalities along many lines. But let me point just to one that I believe will also be impactful, and as we will produce final scenarios, we might really involve that in a serious consideration, which is the growing urban-rural divide. It's something that you see overall around the world, but in the countries of Eastern Partnership, there is these countries are in particular not really prepared to this rapid trend, or they are not looking yet, or they don't have tools to respond to that so quickly. You have the rapid urbanization and the rapidly growing divide of different economic strata of the society. So some people are remaining or even pushed to much deeper poverty, while you have a growing, you have a rise of a new middle or upper middle class, sometimes new rich class, that very often is around the digital sector, and very often is part of the either stabilizing force for political regimes, or a source of instability and a new mechanism for politics. So I stop here. And I pass it on to Serhiy.
Дякую Войчеху за таку загальну інформацію про сам проект і те, що ми очікуємо. Коротко ще раз так, не підбиваючи підсумки, але наголошу, що для нас головне мати сценарії, і ми хочемо отримати їх десь в лютому наступного року. Але ці тренди, про які ми говоримо, які у вас є в публікації,
These trends we are speaking about, you may find them at the beginning of the brief. There are 5 main trends that they are mentioned here. Those who are registered, you got this brief on your email, and you were able to read it. And we would like to speak with you about these points, that these are major trends that will influence Eastern Partnership region and Eastern Partnership countries, including Ukraine. So we invite you to discussion, and Serhiy will tell you more about the trends that were not mentioned by Wojciech. So thank you very much, Gennady. So I would like to add to what Wojciech said, several trends more that we are going to discuss with you, and the probability will be discussed. I won't take much time in order to have more time for questions, for discussion. I would like to say that in the economic area, we should note that all these trends are interrelated. This policy, security is connected to economy, demography, and demography is connected to economy as well. So we have big player, this is the European Union, and European Union will play a major role in the region. And the states, the countries signed the agreement on association, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, and the FTA was signed, and we will have a single market, and we see the trend in the countries of Eastern Partnership, and we believe that this trend will remain in the Eastern European Partnership countries, and we see that in these countries we have a powerful development of information and digital technologies. These trends are global, and in this region, these technologies develop, and we should note that a problem may appear concerning demographics. And if we are speaking about demography, we may say, and you may see it in the report, that this is brain drain. And this may influence ICT sector, because we may face the situation that due to migration and brain drain, the specialists from the region will move to other countries, and this will influence the situation in the region. Also, we say that due to some preferences of Eastern Partnership countries that they get from EU, there is a chance that these preferences will become a buffer in case of a crisis, and will help Eastern Partnership countries in case of economic crisis. And we look at 10 years prospect, and we cannot say that this buffer will really help. This may mitigate situation if some economic crisis appear, but it maybe won't resolve the question if there is a global recession in the economy of the world. If we are speaking about digitalization and information sector, here we outline the trends. First of all, this is about digitalization, and in all European Partnership we have such a trend. And the governments, they try to introduce digitalization in the countries, and Ukraine, among others, also faced these questions. And we have a major force in the parliament that also supported this idea. During their campaign, they also spoke about digitalization, they spoke about smartphone state. And at the grassroots level, we see the lack of information awareness and literacy, whether the users of digitalization are really literate, whether they're able to efficiently use the instruments that are provided due to the development of digital technologies. About the sphere of information security. Here, in political part, we've mentioned the Russian role in the region, and we said that Russia, it is declining, but it still is efficient and influential in the countries of the region, and is trying to reinforce its presence there. And we may see it in information sphere mainly. Russia is actively using media space, electronic media, to test the new technologies and hybrid approaches. And in this context, some countries of Eastern Partnership, they have more opportunities to oppose Russian Federation influence, and we identified Ukraine and Georgia in this. They face hybrid attacks and are able to oppose. Others have less indicators, but still it is necessary to share experience, and among the trends, we lack the sharing of experience. We do not have efficient mechanisms in order to share our knowledge how to oppose Russian Federation influence. And about the last but not the least, the issue of energy. Here we outlined several important trends. Important player is EU, and it will remain the biggest player, and also Eastern Partnership countries should take into account energy agenda of the EU, and they should take into account that the European Union insists on green energy, is trying to introduce green energy, and Eastern Partnership countries should try to get in line with these things. And also, whether we like it or not, there will be a trend to increase energy efficiency in the region and to introduce projects on energy efficiency. Separately, I would like to mention Azerbaijan. This is a country that exports energy sources, and from one side this is positive, from another side this is negative for this country, because 44% of GDP of Azerbaijan is export of gas and oil, and economy is influenced by fluctuations in energy markets, and we should take into account this problem with Azerbaijan. About economy, energy, cooperation in the region, the trend is to improve cohesion, connectivity, and infrastructure, and this trend will remain, we believe, for about 10 years. Summing up, we analyzed 5 areas. We proposed trends for discussion, and based on these trends we outlined, and we want to hear ideas from you. And soon we will prepare these scenarios of development in the Eastern European countries. And now I would like to stop, and I will give the floor to Dmytro in order that he shares his own opinion on the topic. Thank you, Serhiy, for telling about the trends and the directions. And now we start discussion. And we thank Dmytro because he really deals with these issues of Eastern Partnership, and he may show us different areas, or he may provide some help to us in order to correct our work. And also, maybe you would like to add something. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on this research. And this is a privilege, I believe, for me to contribute to your research. I was invited because I have opportunity to look at your project from outside. Maybe I will tell you some provocative things as a response to what I got, to what I heard. First, I would like to question the argument that we may identify some common trends for all 6 countries. I believe that I cannot see all 6 trends in economy, in politics, in security. Even demography is not a common trend for all of us. Countries are absolutely different. We cannot see the homogeneous region. We cannot say that they are the same. We are speaking about 6 absolutely different countries that have different trends. Some of them are similar, of course. We may say that global trends that are similar for all mankind, for all planet, development of new technologies, for example, this is a common trend for all the world. This is not something unique for 6 countries. But we have huge differences. Okay, overall trend of digitalization, maybe it is present everywhere. But what about the trend in the sphere of information technology in all the countries? No, this is not the case. How we can analyze it further? I would like to propose to analyze and to think. I agree with the argument that everything is better seen in comparison when you may compare some things. In order to compare, I believe that these countries of this region, we should understand why we compare it. Why do we do this? If we are speaking about neighborhood and partnership, we may compare these countries with the EU countries. If we are speaking about Ukraine, for example, or Moldova and Georgia, we have association with the EU, and we want further integration with EU. We need to have more comparisons with the EU countries, those that are our neighbors. And I believe that we will have more common trends between, for example, Ukraine and Poland, or Hungary, and Ukraine and Azerbaijan and Armenia. They may have not so much in common. So it would be interesting to have such comparison with different countries. Several remarks concerning the trends, the questions, the problems that will be acute until 2030 and how they will influence scenarios. And according to your project, you should submit some scenarios. I completely agree with the argument that we may state that we have a big gap in the development between Ukraine and all other countries of Eastern Partnership and the EU. We are speaking about developmental gap at the border of the European Union. This gap, it results in migration, labor migration, it is evident. Those countries are more developed and the payment for labor is higher in EU, and it motivates people to migrate to those countries. We may look at these figures, for example, and compare it with figures of our neighbors. For example, we may compare GDP in Poland before they joined the EU and after they joined EU. For example, there was a 5-year gap, and we have a gap in the development. It doesn't grow, this is a good news, but it does not decrease, and this is bad. If we say that we want to have a positive future, we should speak about development of the whole Europe, at least that part as Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, and to improve situation in these countries until 2030. We hope for this trend, and this is a big issue. It depends on many factors. But the key maybe is the vision of the European Union, the vision of EU on these countries, whether there will be further integration to common market, whether there will be financial programs of support and inclusion of these countries to single market, or this will be policy, let's say, that they may hold us in periphery when we are not the full-fledged members of EU. Maybe this should be mentioned This is security. This is the most important issue. Whether there will be more conflicts, whether there will be more aggressive policy of Russian Federation, and more open conflicts may arise with bigger number of victims. Or maybe there will be a trend for less conflicts. And third one is political space, political sphere. Here I believe we may define, we may state that countries are really different. And there are countries in which there were no changes, like, for example, Belarus. And there are countries where the power changed many times, and we got accustomed that democracy is right, and whether these democratic traditions remain until 2030, whether they will be based on sustainable institutions, whether they will rely on sustainable institutions and the rule of law, and whether there will be trust to such institutions. If there are no such institutions, then our democracy won't be stable. And there may be some manipulations and some negative things may happen that will bring us back. Thank you, Dmytro. So we started discussion with such interesting speakers, how to compare the countries among Eastern Partnership countries, or to compare them with with EU countries. So we have benchmark Lithuania, and we may take this into account when we compare GDP of countries and other indicators, whether we have something to compare or not, and how we are going to compare all of them. If maybe you have some comments, and I see that you put it down, and you put down these responses to your research. Please take a mic. I would like to add, first of all, I agree with the argument that countries really differ. Maybe Ukraine and Moldova are similar. Ukraine and Moldova, they are close. Maybe this is an exception. About the trends, I would like to add political dispersion in all the countries. In some countries, for example, like Azerbaijan and Belarus, there is no such trend, but in other countries, there is an overall European process, and we are not immune to it. Militarization of society. Putin demonstrates its force, and it's even done in kindergartens. It exists in Belarus, it exists in other forms. It exists in Ukraine, in Georgia. Children know what war is. So this is an ongoing trend, and potential and importance of military structures, it increases. And the role of the media, the less society is developed, the more it is influenced by the media. For example, a French person goes to the church once a month, and we may say that Ukrainians, they watch TV a lot. So this is African trend, and this trend will increase if we do not fight with it consciously. About Russian society is more resilient than was expected. And who forced them? Who pressured them? No one. Turbin and Siemens, they came to Crimea and they did business there. and Total and other businesses' money, they go for oil production. And the sanctions are easily avoided. Italy spoke about sanctions loud, and then economists calculated what Italy lost because of sanctions, 0.2% of its exports. The same in other countries. And the last one, in US after 2020, in case of change of the president, of Trump, maybe attitude will be changed to Europe and to European Union. If this attitude changes, if they stop playing the rulers of the world and will deal with approximation with this important ally, they may also return to Central and Eastern Europe, because Polish, Romanian, and Baltic trends, they won't be forgotten. This is reflected in the power in the US, and we should promote this. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We will take your recommendations into account. We put them down. Dear colleagues, please, next question. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm Luzhakova Elizaveta, Post Foundation. I have a question about economy. We all know that cooperation and partnership is based on openness of the markets, on parity. But export and import indications concerning implementation of association with Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, it was released in November. It shows negative trend during 5 years. And the relationship with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, and also the trade with EU, the indicators are really low in export and import. I may show you these indicators. To my mind, important role is played by third countries, like China, it was mentioned before. They are trying to use their diplomacy. They have cheap production, and yuan, their currency, also is weakening. And how can we use the opportunities of cooperation? How to oppose these challenges that are put by third countries? And do you have a plan of common security from that loan expansion? And how European structures are ready to support their economies and to mitigate the risks if we take into account that China is the main exporter and the main influencer in this sector? Do you have other questions, please? And then we will provide answers. As I've heard from the first speech, one of the directions is economy and ecology. And then we spoke about energy and cooperation in this area. What about ecology? It disappears, I guess. At the start of July, we had a conference in Toronto concerning Ukraine, and ambassadors from 32 countries they participated. Everyone spoke about economy, but only the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland spoke about environment during this conference. You've mentioned only environment, but you didn't deliberate on this. This is an important issue. We'll start with Wojciech. Maybe you will respond, and then we will answer other questions than Serhiy and Dmytro, but first is Wojciech.
Thanks so much. I mean, starting from Dmitri's remarks, that's very important to remember in the first place that naturally these trends are not uniform. They differ. They have their national flavor, and in case of bigger countries, they have also their regional flavors. I mean, you don't have necessarily the same trends pronounced in the, say, northeastern regions of Ukraine as in the borderland with Poland and to the west of Ukraine. But we are nevertheless trying to find the trends that are global trends and pronounced in the countries of Eastern Partnership that provoke political responses. So anything of political significance where the governments would be responding to, or societies would be politicized and responding to, would be important for us. And therefore, thank you for all your comments and questions and inputs. They are indeed very, very important. Perhaps I leave the security question to elaborate on to Serhiy, if you would like to do it more. Let me answer first a couple of points that Mr. Ambassador already raised. One on the militarization of the society, but I'm not sure this is a trend or this is a result that you observe already. This is a legacy of the past, or is it something that happens in response to the recent conflicts? Where is this militarization going? I don't know, but we will look into that. Maybe here, let me just say that as we develop those trends, they are serving us to develop potential scenarios. After we develop scenarios, we don't stop there, because we use the scenarios and the whole exercise in order to develop public discussions in public about what are possible futures ahead. And for that, the topic of whether our societies will grow democracy and become more pluralistic, more open, more integrative, or whether they will be more securitized and militarized, that is actually the end question and the basic question. So I will leave it as a very important topic, and it's also, I must say, a pressing issue in how Central European countries, so Visegrad group countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, are experiencing the same elements. Many of the factors that we call now trends, we call illiberal democracy, are also because of threat perception, increased threat perception. Perception is never about reality, it's about psychological perception. And many of those created sort of militarization or militant position of at least certain segments in the society and enabled illiberal or authoritarian tendencies, like in Hungary. The role of media is indeed one of the key subjects. That is about internet consumption patterns, trust in media, plurality of media. In a nutshell, what I call the real information sovereignty, not sovereignty of the government, sovereignty of the people who have access to information, and that is different in different countries. Let me point to one interesting observation here. Things never stay the same. As we see growing footprint of Russia in Belarus, you can see it even more in the future. You see a response of the Belarusian authorities allowing for more dissent voices and critical voices in the society and from the opposition as well, in order to build resilience against the takeover of the information sphere by one actor, meaning Russia. And these developments in particular countries are happening in differentiated way for different reasons. But the role of media definitely as a whole area, especially we know it from Ukrainian case. It's a whole area, not only for Eastern Partnership. This is the whole dilemma of how it will develop in the global arena of at least in democracies. I take your point on the changing attitudes of USA towards Europe after possible change of power in 2020 in the Washington, but I would question that. I would question whether a democratic president or a different Republican, that's even less likely, president would necessarily change the attitude and policy on Europe. Because that is assuming that Donald Trump is just an accident in the line of the kind of a political line of the United States. However, he might be only amplifying again certain directions that are already existing in the U.S. diplomacy, in the U.S. strategy towards Europe, where U.S. for a number of years have been signaling that it's been providing protective umbrella, security umbrella over Europe, while being exploited economically. I mean, still a superpower, although European Union before Brexit is already bigger economic power than the US. But still, US is the economic superpower in global terms, and it is being, not having or not. In a nutshell, US is exporting security and Germany is exporting cars. In this perspective, US policymakers and lobby interests are advocating for balancing the trade-off between Europe and the US. And I think we could rather assume that there will be a continuation of this hard relationship with Europe, but the interest in Central and Eastern Europe is going to be only increasing. First, because of possible economic developments. The US sees the potential, and that's one element. But more importantly, it's on security. It's within the security framework that has been recently announced, with the declaring China and Russia being revisionist powers. The front line is our region. So there is, of course, an element of trade and China. We see this. I don't see that really in numbers. European Union is the main partner for countries of Eastern Partnership, but China is showing its presence. Our considerations so far have been that for China, Eastern Partnership countries are not such a big kind of gain. They're not the main object of interest. It is the European Union, the markets of and influence on the European Union, where China really wants to set its foot on. But we shouldn't, and we're not dismissing the questions about China. For instance, looking at the Serbia scenario, where you have already Chinese police force in the country and Chinese surveillance systems in the country that potentially could become EU member in the future, that changes and influences the dynamics, the political dynamics for Serbia in the process of integration. And I touch on this ecology maybe just very briefly, which is something that we're trying to understand and develop. But where there's political significance, first of all, it's generational, that we see that there is a language of a generation that is coming of age within the next 10 years that is most likely, that's our bet, that will be around ecology and environment awareness. People are, and that is maybe creating a generational divide. The older generation are quite okay with the tools and responses on environment as it is today, while we see that there is a teenage population and student population that is growing radical because of unequal opportunities to live the same or to share the same benefits of environment and natural environment in the world. And the other element of the ecology is something that we didn't touch upon, but I think it's quite interesting and important. Again, air pollution and air quality, and therefore something that has an impact on life expectancy. In countries of Central and Eastern Europe, so Eastern Partnership and Central Europe, the situation is very dire. That puts a lot of costs on healthcare, That is because of the cancers, that is about all the treatments, and also about the investment that is necessary, and perhaps will be, on the positive note, coming from the European Union, because there needs, and many countries advocate that now, there is a need for just transition. Because of the past dependency, heavy industry, also in Ukraine, to move to a cleaner air that is less polluting the world around, but Europe in specific, European Union might be kind of encouraged, or the countries, donors of the European Union might be encouraged to invest more to have it actually happen. That this creates political opportunities to from quid pro quo to more synergy simply and cohesion.
Дякую, Войciech. Сергію, питання, які залишились?
Дуже коротко по екології.
About ecology briefly. So I didn't mention all that was mentioned in our trends. We have this information in our materials. We will take this into account, and we should outline this area of environment separately. So we had discussions about the concept, about geographical area, and we agreed that there is a lot of differences between countries of Eastern Partnership, but there are common characteristics concerning security. That's why representatives of these countries raised these issues at the level of the European Union. 5 out of 6 countries, they have conflicts in their territories inspired by Russian Federation, and 6 countries is controlled by Russian Federation. There is no open conflict because of this. About the policy, one common trend. Security is the common trend, and connected with security is one more characteristic, is instability, lack of stability in all these countries. In Moldova, political instability was systematized. I cannot imagine stable situation that they adapted to constant political crisis. Now we see developments in Georgia, and Ukraine underwent 2 revolutions. We see a situation in Armenia. There was a revolution as well, and the situation in Belarus is not stable. And external players play a big role in this. And also Wojciech mentioned that China is active, and if someone in Warsaw or Tbilisi mentioned about, people asked about China. We should take into account presence of China. About the mechanism of the European Commission, this is the question to European Commission, but in the trends we see that European countries, EU countries, and Eastern Partnership countries will take into account China to some extent, as a threat or as a source of cheap loans. Dmytro, I would like to state that it's better to have instability, but democratic instability, than stability, but authoritarian one. I believe that the spirit of freedom that was released and that was gotten by the country, it cannot be returned back. And maybe Belarus and Azerbaijan will also go along this way. Some people said before that Arab countries won't have any other trends, only authoritarian regimes. But we see that this is not the end of history. We will see how things will develop. And Wojciech mentioned about the main aim is to provide political responses. And this question is really interesting for me. And Eastern Partnership, before it was neighborhood. This is the policy of EU, and there will be a response from EU on all these policies. I believe that EU should think about looking at those countries that chose integration with the European Union. They should consider them as a broader Europe, and this is a mental map, mental change of view on these countries, and this should bring proper political responses to integrate these countries economically more and to respond to threats from Russian Federation that exists not only for these countries but for Europe on the whole, and also to support democratic development in these countries. This is a difficult issue. What may be the instruments in political development? The key is internal wish of people of those countries to have democracy, rule of law, and proper governance. But I believe that the European Union may think how to help those countries in which people expect this. We would like to propose our opinions to the European Union in order to help them in their work. I see that time is off. Do you want to add something? I would like to remind you that we've sent a brief to you by email in Ukrainian about dynamics of trade. There is positive dynamics of trade with EU. It increases with 3 countries, and export also increases. What does not increase is the rates of growth of export to EU are not always bigger than the export to other countries of the world. For example, if we speak about Georgia, this is the case, but this is not a negative trend. I believe that this is a positive trend. On the whole, in all 3 association agreements, we have good economic indicators, and every expert agrees on this. And dear friends, thank you very much. And if you have some ideas, if you want to propose these ideas to us, please send your ideas on our email address. We thank our partners, Visegrad and Respublika, Marshall Foundation, and we will be glad to see you during our next events. We will present scenarios, we will discuss them, and those who are interested in non-liberal democracies, I invite you to Kiev Hotel at 10, and we will discuss whether it is something good or whether it is